Here's why you can't exterminate us. We're not huddled in one place. We span the galaxy. We need no lords or leaders, so you can't destroy our command. We can live without technology, so we can fight with our bare hands. We have no species or bloodline, so we can rebuild our ranks with others who want to join us. We're more than just a people or an army. We're a culture. We are an idea, and you can't kill ideas. But we can certainly kill you.
Several decades before the Clone War, on a farm world named Concord Dawn, which sat within Mandalorian space, Jango Fett was born. When Jango was only a child, a civil war between the Mandalorians and the Death Watch, a splinter group, descended on his homestead. The young boy was caught in the middle. He watched his parents die and his elder sister went missing. But from the ashes, after proving his courage at such a young age, Jango was recruited by the leader of the Mandalorians, Jaster Muriel. For years, Jaster raised Jango as his own child, teaching him the culture of the Mandalorians, their code of honor, their skill in combat. But like most Mandalorians, Jaster lost his life in battle, the highest honor in the culture. Death Watch and the betrayal of Jaster's right-hand man were the cause, and in death, Jaster left his legacy to Jango as the new Mandalore. Jango led the Mandalorians with honor and prestige until the Battle of Galadron. Death Watch framed the murders of several political activists on Jango's group and requested Jedi assistance. The Jedi were led by the Great Master Dooku, and the following battle was brutal. Jango was its only survivor, taking several Jedi down with his bare hands. After the battle, Jango was sold into slavery, but Jango's time as a slave was short-lived. He escaped when the first opportunity presented itself. His first self-imposed mission was to find and kill the leader of Death Watch, Tor Vizsla. Vizsla was responsible for the deaths of Jango's two father figures, his biological father and his Mandalore father. After a fight that lasted several minutes, after being stabbed, poisoned, and brutalized, Jango achieved his vengeance. Now, with no cause and no men, Jango needed to make a living. For the next 2 decades, Jango became the most infamous man in the galaxy. Like other Mandalorians before him, he used his skill to foster a career in bounty hunting, and he was very good at it. A decade before the Clone Wars, his exploits caught the attention of the Sith Lords, Darth Sidious and Darth Tyrannus. Tyrannus, who was already familiar with Jango's skill when he was once the Jedi Master Dooku, set up a test for the bounty hunter. 5 million credits if he could kill the Dark Jedi, Komari Vosa, Dooku's former apprentice. When Jango succeeded, Tyrannus knew he had the perfect host for a clone army. After a meeting with the Sith Lord, Jango agreed to the cloning process, and the large sum of credits that came along with it. Unfortunately for Jango, he never saw his clones in active combat. At the very start of the Clone Wars, Jango was killed by a Jedi Master named Mace Windu, beheaded in the Petronaki Arena. Though Jango met his end, he met it on the battlefield like a true Mandalorian. What's more, he did achieve his goal in cultivating Jaster's legacy and the legacy of the Mandalorians by way of his clones, but more so, by way of his only son. There was a second condition to Jango's terms when he met with Lord Tyrannus. In addition to a large sum of credits, he wanted the first clone for himself. But for this clone, he wanted it to be unaltered, no growth acceleration, no tampering of any kind. The Sith Lord and the cloners of Kamino agreed to Jango's wishes, creating Boba Fett. For nearly 10 years, Jango taught Boba all he knew, molding him into the greatest bounty hunter and killing machine he could be. Though Boba lived on Kamino, he did not attend classes with the other clones. Instead, he was taught directly under his father through experience, as opposed to books and hollows. Jango also taught Boba the ways of the Mandalorians, including their language, which Boba was fluent in by the age of 10. Unfortunately, Boba's tutelage would be cut short at the Battle of Geonosis. Distraught, Boba swore vengeance against the Jedi Order for killing his father, seeking guidance from Aurra Sing, a former Jedi Knight. For years, Aurra Sing, the other bounty hunters of the guild, and a journal left by his father, taught Boba what they knew, continuing where Jango left off. One of his mentors, Cad Bane, was said to be in direct competition with Jango before his father's demise. Boba was a prodigy among the bounty hunters of the galaxy. Some of his bounties were in direct competition with some of the greats, such as Asajj Ventress and Dirge. During the Clone War, Boba had two opportunities to avenge his father's death, once on the Star Destroyer Endurance, another in the Supreme Chancellor's office, but Boba failed to kill Mace Windu on both occasions. It would not be long until Boba Fett was regarded as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. He thrived under the new Galactic Empire, often taking jobs directly from the Empire itself. His line of work had him crossing paths with every group in the galaxy, whether it was the smugglers or criminals of the underworld, such as Jabba the Hutt, Han Solo, and Lando Calrissian, or the Jedi Knights of the Old Republic, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ferrus Olin, or the dignitaries of the Empire itself, such as the Grand Inquisitors, Darth Vader, and Grand Moff Tarkin. Boba spent his days infiltrating organizations, tracking anyone that needed to be found, or silencing people altogether. If someone needed a job done, Boba Fett was always the first choice, if the price was right. But perhaps his most noteworthy job was his capture of Han Solo, commissioned privately by Darth Vader. While the job was successful, it brought a lot of heat on Boba from the Rebel Alliance and other bounty hunters. Before handing Solo over to Jabba on Tatooine, he was ruthlessly pursued by Lando Calrissian and Chewbacca. Eventually he evaded the pair, but when he arrived on Tatooine, he was ambushed by a group of bounty hunters. Through a clever ruse, he got them off his tail and delivered Solo to Jabba at last. But Boba Fett did not have much time to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Several weeks after his delivery, Han's friends came to rescue the smuggler, and through a set of unlucky circumstances, Boba Fett was thrown into the Sarlacc pit of Carkoon. Though legend has it he survived the ordeal, no one knows of his ultimate fate, and the fate of Mandalore's legacy. For this video, I will be examining the canon versions of the characters, using Legends continuity where it does not conflict with the main canon. For Jango Fett, I will be observing him until Attack of the Clones, utilizing Legends material such as the Dark Horse comics, the Jango Fett video game, and other subsequent sourcebooks. For Boba Fett, I will be observing him up until Return of the Jedi, utilizing Legends material such as the Marvel and Dark Horse comics, the novels, the Force Unleashed 2 video game, and subsequent sourcebooks. Currently, his life after Return of the Jedi is in flux. As stated by the story group's Pablo Hidalgo, Boba Fett is both simultaneously alive and dead in the Sarlacc. But if we are to believe rumors, one of the spin-off movies may include Boba Fett post Return of the Jedi. Let's get right into the comparison of these two. Genetically speaking, they are complete copies of each other, as Boba Fett is a clone of his father. So in terms of baseline physicality, they were exactly on par. To compare the two, we will have to examine what they did with their physicality, how they used their bodies in combat. Their physical training was relatively comparable. Jango was taught by Mandalorian commandos as a child, and Boba was trained by Jango. It's likely they knew the same moves. In fact, Obi-Wan Kenobi makes note of it in the Last of the Jedi book series. Boba held an impressive level of physical power. He held the bounty hunter Bosch at bay with brute strength on 2 occasions, and Trandoshans were noted for their brute physical power. He also made short work of an unnamed 6-armed alien, breaking most of his arms in a matter of seconds. And even as a child, he was able to rip the tooth from a balyag. Despite his fantastic showings of strength, he had a thinner build than his father, favoring cunning and weaponry over muscle power. With that being said, Boba's skill with hand-to-hand combat allowed him to go toe-to-toe with Darth Vader himself, though it should be noted that Vader's intention was not to kill the bounty hunter. Also, Boba Fett's fight with Vader is in direct conflict with the main timeline of the Star Wars canon. Vader and Boba Fett do not meet until after the events of A New Hope, according to the Marvel's run of Star Wars comics. Hence, Boba Fett's fight with Vader was sit comfortably within Star Wars Legends continuity, as their fight took place before A New Hope. Still, there are other feats of Boba Fett fighting Force sensitives that do not conflict with canon, such as his fight with a Starkiller clone, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and General Kota. What's more, his personal accolades from Star Wars Tales suggest several Jedi kills under his belt. While this may not mean he fought them hand to hand, it does suggest a level of skill to at least contend with them. When looking at Jango Fett and his accomplishments, we have to observe his fight against the Jedi during the Battle of Galadron. After Jango's Mandalorians were killed by reflected blaster fire, he ordered his squad to switch to projectiles and hand-to-hand. Though his squad perished, Jango survived, killing 6 Jedi with his bare hands. This feat would place Jango amongst his great Mandalorian ancestors, Mandalore the Destroyer, the Ultimate, the Preserver, who also contended with Jedi using only their martial skill. While the Jedi Jango faced were nameless knights, the feat was still significant, and it's further bolstered by Jango's contention with the famed Jedi Knight, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Even the great Mace Windu feared and respected Jango's lethality, tormented by nightmares at the start of the Clone War. And for me, this is where the slight difference arises between the Fetts. Jango was a warrior first, bounty hunter second. Boba Fett was a bounty hunter first, warrior second. A physical bout between the two would look much like the fight between Boba Fett and the proxy Jango. If the fight came to blows, I feel Jango would have the slight advantage in terms of training, skill, and experience. Granted, I do not think the fight would be as one-sided, as Proxy was made of strong alloys and Boba Fett was injured. But I do think Jango's Mandalorian experience would outmatch his son's. Jango Fett gets the slight edge for his physical abilities. Before becoming the most infamous bounty hunter of the galaxy, Jango Fett was a Mandalorian commando. And like the Mandalorians before him, his weapons and armor were extensions of his culture. The Mandalorians prided themselves on their ability to survive and thrive without weapons or armor, but their warlike society was also based around them. As such, Jango Fett was highly trained and highly skilled with the tools of war. Same goes for Boba Fett. He used cunning and skill to overcome his adversaries. His principal tools to accomplish these ends were his weapons and armor. Boba Fett is said to have mastered every weapon the galaxy had to offer, save for the lightsaber. He could kill his target as easily with a sniper rifle as he could with a combat knife. A Mandalorian's armor and their T-shaped visor helmets were the primary symbols of their culture, a symbol that would last from the Old Republic to the Galactic Empire and beyond. During the height of the Jedi and the Mandalorian conflict, most Mandalorian warriors wore Beskar iron, one of the most resilient alloys in the galaxy, known to repel the power of a lightsaber. However, during the time of Jango and Boba Fett, Beskar was hard to come by. Though keeping to the Mandalorian style of armor, Jango's plating was made of Durasteel, one of the most common alloys in the Star Wars universe. Jango's armor protected him against blaster bolts, light laser fire, and kinetic impacts. And though his armor did not protect his whole body, his undergarments were resilient to the elements and dispersed physical impacts against him. Boba's armor plating was much the same, but instead of using Durasteel, the bounty hunter used Duraplast. Both alloys shared the same properties, but Duraplast had the added benefit of being able to reduce the effects of a lightsaber. And in general, Duraplast held up longer than Durasteel. To put it in perspective, of the 3 metals, Durasteel was the weakest, only able to survive the grazing effects of a lightsaber. Duraplast was second, more resilient than Durasteel, and largely resistant to lightsabers. And finally there was Beskar iron, which was virtually impervious to lightsabers. What I'm trying to get at is that Boba Fett's armor was superior to Jango's, even if marginally. Both Jango and Boba's helmets had sound and motion sensors, The difference in their helmets were Jango's sharpshooting schematics, which helped him with the accuracy of his shots, much like modern sniper rifles today. While Boba did not have any accuracy readings in his HUD, his helmet did filter out lethal gases, as well as protection against harsh light, like flash grenades. What's more, his motion sensors were equipped with infrared readings, though Jango had the added benefit of being able to see in all directions. Though Jango and Boba have used many weapons throughout their careers, for this matchup, I'll be examining their use of their primary weapons, Jango's custom Wester 34 blaster and Boba's EE3 carbine. According to the Attack of the Clones visual dictionary, Jango's blasters sacrifice high capacity for a high rate of fire at close range. It's the Lorian alloy preventing the gun from overheating. It was this rate of fire that made Jango so effective against Jedi adversaries. It also had the added feature of a magnetic connection between Jango's gloves, enabling him to reach his blasters at a distance. But where Jango's blasters had a high rate of fire at close range, Boba's carbine packed a bigger punch at a greater distance. The differences in their primary weapons, to me, represents their background and philosophy to combat. As I've stated, I view Jango more as an up-in-your-face warrior, so the use of weapons that are meant to be used at close range makes sense for his character. And by contrast, Boba was a more traditional bounty hunter, keeping his distance from his target. That said, both Jango and Boba had other weapons at their disposal, hidden within their armor. Both were equipped with a jetpack outfitted with a rocket, wrist-mounted flamethrowers, wrist-mounted lasers and rockets, whipcord and grappling hooks, and many more. The main difference in their equipment was Boba's sonic emitter, a device not attributed to Jango in any source material. Much like the men themselves, their weapons and armor were nearly a carbon copy of one another, but there were some key differences. Boba Fett definitely earns an advantage for his armor plating, this is assured, and many of their hidden weapons within their armor were similar enough to be cancelled out. The debate arises in their primary weapons and some of their specifications. When looking at the Wester 34 blasters and the EE3 carbine, it's more a case of situational advantage. At a distance, Boba's weapon holds an advantage, but at close range, Jango's pistols are more favorable. But considering Boba's ability to maintain distance, his rifle may be more advantageous. Ultimately, when looking at their equipment, they look very similar, but when taking a macro view, Boba Fett gets the advantage for his weapons and armor. Jango and Boba Fett have very similar combat tactics, but their upbringing and their experiences did manifest some differences. For Jango, he was trained primarily as a Mandalorian warrior, where direct combat was the chief discipline of the culture. This is highlighted by his fighting style during the Battle of Quarta 6 and Galadron. When he eventually became a bounty hunter, he tapered his style from a Mandalorian brawler to a disciplined assassin. During the events of Blood Ties, one of Jango's first lessons to Boba was the importance of keeping distance from one's target. It was a lesson similar to what Leon, the hitman, gave to Matilda on her first lesson. The first weapon mastered by an assassin was the sniper rifle, then to standard rifles, then pistols, then knives, and last, of course, your bare hands. These lessons would be invaluable to Boba Fett. Though the young bounty hunter would not see many battles of direct confrontation, he did have a more diverse palette when it came to his bounties. Beyond the training of his father, he was also trained by members of the Bounty Hunters Guild. And while Boba dealt with his targets at a distance, much like his father, he did not take issue with bringing his fight to his adversaries. One direct comparison we have between the Fetts is how they dealt with Jedi. When Jango faced Obi-Wan Kenobi, he made sure to keep his distance, only engaging the Jedi in hand-to-hand combat when no other options were offered to him. And when facing the Jedi on Galadron, he used the environment to his advantage. By contrast, when Boba faced Luke Skywalker, instead of using the cell barge for distance, he closed the gap, engaging the Jedi at close range. This showing stands at cross purposes with a bounty hunter's typical mode of operation, and in the context of Empire Strikes Back, Boba knew to keep his distance. While Boba has shown some interesting choices, we cannot assume that he was one-minded in his aggressive tactics. As the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, he must have employed other methods as well. He was very adept at shadowing Han Solo without being seen, and he took down the Bounty Hunters Guild with wit and cunning. But unfortunately, these are non-combative tactics. When coming up with a verdict between these two, I ran into a bit of a conundrum: perception versus reality. Looking at Boba Fett's training, his weapon choice, equipment, and line of work, I would think he would appreciate and understand the advantage of a ranged weapon and the use of his environment. When I think of Boba Fett, I think of a skilled assassin, as his reputation within the lore suggests. But when looking at his movie feats, and even some of his Legends material, he seemed to take a more forward approach, using his weapons to overwhelm, rather than undermine. When I look at Jango, I think of him as a Mandalorian first, a brutal warrior who would prefer beating his enemy into submission rather than a blaster through the heart. And while the former is true, within the scope of the movies, and even in his standalone video game, he is much more tactical. He uses his jetpack to keep distance, he uses his rockets to rain devastation from afar, and he takes advantage of his surroundings. That's not to say that Boba has not done the same, but more often than not, or at least, relative to his father, he made some unconventional choices. For this round, Jango Fett gets the edge for his combative and tactical abilities. The fight between Jango and Boba was chosen mostly because you all wanted to see it, but examining the two characters was a good experience. While on the surface, and quite literally, they are carbon copies of each other, there were differences that were interesting to discuss. Though they were cut from the same cloth, they were molded by different experiences in different time periods. Through strife and turmoil, they both led successful careers, becoming the best bounty hunters of the Old Republic and the Galactic Empire, respectively. But if they both took on a bounty against each other, who would collect? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place on level 1313. As a final tally, I would say the advantage to the victor goes 7 to 10. The following is a hypothetical battle of one majority victory. Keeping to their bounty hunter mentalities, this fight would likely start out at a distance. Using the environment for cover, Boba would likely have the early advantage, firing off suppressive fire with his EE-3 carbine, pinning his father down. In certain scenarios, I see the matchup ending somewhere around here. If Boba keeps his distance, he would ultimately maintain his advantage. But considering Jango's experience using his surroundings to his advantage, I find it more likely for him to close the distance. It's likely he would use his jetpack, slowly making his way towards his son. He may even use his rocket to distract Boba, obstructing his view with a pile of debris. At some point, Jango would find the range he needed, using his sharpshooting HUD to fire off rounds against Boba. Though his mark would be true, Boba's armor would hold up to the punishment, at least long enough for him to retaliate. To regain better positioning, Boba would throw out a sonic emitter, overloading Jango's sensors, but Jango's natural reaction would be to blind fire his flame projector or rockets, negating his precarious position. Boba will respond by either jetpacking away from the rocket blast or tanking the fire with his flame retardant armor. The two would keep exchanging rockets for fire, grappling hooks for blasters, exhausting all of their tricks. Though I favor Boba's weaponry and Jango's tactics, in a head-to-head of equipment and strategy, midway through the firefight, it could go either way. That said, I do see this coming down to a fistfight, Boba using his grappling hook to take away his father's blasters, or Jango using his hand-to-hand skills to disarm Boba. It would be a fight like the Mandalorians of old, no real need for weapons or equipment. Two warriors, left to their most basic tools, their feet and their fist. And this is where a clear advantage would manifest. The fight would be brutal, and they would trade many blows against each other, but Jango would be a touch faster, a touch stronger. He would take the punishment, but also dish it out, employing his combat roots as a Mandalorian. And in due course, whether by way of broken bones, head trauma, chokehold, or submission, he would defeat Boba. And in conclusion, I declare Jango Fett, the Mandalorian, Jaster's legacy, the prime clone, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion based on my interpretation of the lore. In the context of Attack of the Clones Jango and Return of the Jedi Boba, Do you agree the original will be the victor? Or do you think Boba Fett would have the advantage more often than not? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always. I attribute many of Deepa's physical capabilities to her training with Mace Windu. No, why are you mowing your lawn right now? I'm recording a Let's Play.